There have been a lot of videos about the 64 classes of Ashes of Creation, which is why even with all of the Ashes of Creation videos that I have produced so far, I've held off on doing my own video on the classes. But now is the time. To distinguish this video from the others out there, I will more so do a broad overview of the system and then compare it to other similar systems and other MMOs. As to be honest, there really is not that much that we know yet about the classes. The system sounds massive and complex, but it really isn't once you dig into it. By now, most of you have probably seen this chart. Players select one of the 8 primary archetypes when they begin the game, and they cannot later change this choice. Upon hitting level 25, players can choose a secondary archetype from these 8 archetypes, which then forms their class. This secondary archetype can be changed by speaking to an NPC in a village node or higher. Now, it is important to note that Ashes of Creation does not truly have 64 classes. Class is the term used by Intrepid, so obviously I will use the same terminology. But these 64 classes are not truly distinct classes, each with a completely different class kit. Instead, the skills are provided by the primary archetype choice at the start of the game, and the secondary archetype choice just augments those skills. Secondary archetypes will provide 4 different schools of augmentation. A few of these have been mentioned before, such as the Mage, Teleportation, and Elemental schools, and the rest of them can be found on the wiki, but the majority of them are still not known. Choosing the same secondary archetype as your primary archetype will create a class that is focused on that archetype, but we don't know any details on what that actually means just yet. In addition to the augments provided by the secondary archetype choice, there are several other augment sources, including social organizations, religions, and your racial choice. Augments are said to be a form of horizontal progression, but they also have said that augments can fundamentally change the way an ability works, while not changing the core ability. They've also said that in some rare cases, augments can even create entirely new skills. In general, augments can change abilities in a minor or a major way. Some might change the damage type or value, the cooldown, the distance, or change a skill from ranged to melee. A few examples that have been given of augments include a mage secondary archetype might be able to augment a fighter's rush to be a teleport instead of having a travel time, or a rogue secondary archetype might give some stealth modifiers to skills. In addition to augments, you have additional customization with traditional skill points and gearing as seen in most MMOs. In reality, there are 8 classes that are highly customizable in Ashes of Creation. 64 classes would certainly be impossible to balance, and even 8 classes with the extreme amount of customization that Ashes is planned to have will be a huge challenge to balance. But on that note, balance is said to be rock, paper, scissors style, where some classes and specs will have clear advantages over others. And balance is not at the 1 versus 1 level, it is at the group level. In theory, balancing at the group level might be easier than the individual level, but we will have to wait and see how it works in Alpha 2. Players also are allowed to slot anywhere from 15 to 20 skills on their bar from a pool of 35 to 40 skills. So that adds to the build variety and difficulty when balancing. Getting into the primary archetypes, which as I have said before are really what you might think of as a traditional class in most fantasy style RPGs, as they give you your abilities. The 8 archetypes are broken down into 2 types, martial archetypes and arcane archetypes. The archetypes of Ashes follow the traditional Holy Trinity seen in most MMOs. The tank is the only archetype that can function as a main tank. The cleric is the only archetype that can function as the main healer. The bard is a true support class, which is not something that we often see in modern MMOs. And the summoner is a sort of jack of all trades that can fill multiple roles, but cannot be the main tank or healer. The fighter is your traditional melee brawler archetype. The rogue is your stealthy style melee damage dealer, but do note that stealth in Ashes is not a complete cloak. It is said to operate somewhat like it did in the Apocalypse Battle Royale, in that the slower you move, the more stealth you will be, but you will never be completely invisible when you are moving. The ranger is your traditional ranged bow-wielding damage dealer. The mage is your traditional magic damage dealer. I'm not going to go deep into discussion on each of these classes as we haven't seen much of them yet. I do have breakdowns on the Alpha 2 mage, tank, cleric, ranger, and fighter, and the few abilities we have seen of each. And the wiki also has all of these skills seen so far for both Alpha 1 and Alpha 2. Also, each archetype will have its own class resource. So far we've only seen the class resources for the cleric, which were conviction and divine power, and courage for the tank. Be sure to check out the wiki page, which I will link for details on all of these, and check out my videos where I break down the cleric and tank showcases where I also talk about these. And that is really all there is regarding the Ashes of Creation classes and archetypes. That is a quick look at the classes as we currently know them. We have yet to see the Summoner and Bard at all. We saw a tiny glimpse of the Rogue during the season showcase, and the Fighter we saw 2 skills during the melee showcase. So there's a lot to see still, and there's a lot we don't know yet. But what about comparisons to other MMOs? Well, Ashes again appears to borrow heavily from Arcade with this system. However, there are some major differences. In Arcade, there were actually 220 class combinations. You selected 3 skill sets from 11 different choices, and once you select all 3, you would form your class. Each skill set would just add more skills to your skill pool. It didn't modify your skills in any way. So in reality, it is not truly 220 distinct classes, it is just 220 different skill set combinations. And in the end, only a few setups were viable, and so the class diversity was not nearly as robust as you might expect. Rift had a pretty similar system in that each class could choose up to 3 souls from a large list of souls available. These would give new skills and talent points. So really, the system that Ashes of Creation is going for is not entirely new. It is just a variation on systems we have seen before. I'm excited to try it out in Alpha 2 and hopefully decide which class I want to be. I've played every role in MMOs fairly extensively. I'm not one of those that plays the same role in each MMO I play. I've played a healer quite often, and probably the most, as that is such an in-demand role, so I've often just filled in that role. And one class I've really played the least is the Rogue archetype, so I'm actually considering Rogue for Ashes of Creation, and I'm going to give it a long look in Alpha 2. And I do enjoy the potential outplay potential that rogues often have in other MMOs in outnumbered PvP fights, but we'll have to wait and see if outplay potential is actually even possible in Ashes of Creation once we actually get into the game in Alpha 2. And my final decision on a class is not going to be until I've probably tried every single class. And that is all we really know about the 64 classes of Ashes of Creation. Thanks for watching to the end, and with that guys, I will see you in the next video.